Hi, bitch besties. It's your main bitch, Melly. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome to another episode of the Judgy Bitch Pod. Hello, bitch besties. Welcome to a new episode of the Judgy Bitch Pod. And this is the first official episode of this segment on the Page of Crime with my co-host, Paige. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on. I can't wait. I just mentioned to you, and I just have to repeat it. This case we're going to discuss today had me busy the entire week. I watched so many documentaries about it. I know every angle of this case now. I went down the rabbit hole multiple times and did the Reddit search and all this. It's just crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. I can't wait to discuss this with you.
I know, I'm excited.
But just a heads up for everybody watching and listening to us. This is just our opinion. We're not here to do any conspiracy theories or bring any new evidence you haven't heard about. That's not us. We're just two judgy bitches giving our opinions about the information we heard of. And
Yeah.
that's my disclaimer.
Yeah, don't get us in trouble.
And all is alleged. Allegedly.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, man. Paige, this case, the Laci Peterson case, is the case we're going to discuss today. And I want to call it the Laci Peterson case because, you know, there's always this argument of not making the potential suspect or murder or whatever more famous by, you know, calling it his name. But of course, we're going to discuss his name too in this episode.
Right.
We're going to discuss the entire case. And for
Okay,
everybody who may have not heard about this case, the Laci Peterson case is a wildly discussed case. It's so interesting. And after watching all those documentaries this week, I can tell you when you come into this case completely unbiased, you may be one opinion when you watch the Hulu documentary, and you may be a complete different opinion when you watch the Netflix documentary. Both documentaries are reflecting on this case from a different point of view, and it's so interesting. And there's so many facts and details around this. So I can't wait to hear you guys' opinion at the end of this, what you think, whether or not is he guilty or not guilty. But back in the day, it caused so much media frenzy. And we're going to talk about all this in detail. And we're going to show you the differences between the Hulu documentary and the Netflix documentary. So let's see how it goes. Paige, co-host, are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's dive into this. There is so much detail to this case. As I said, I dove deep into it nose first. I don't really know how to tell you, Paige, but I have 10 pages of notes.
God. Jeez. Yeah, no, I have about like 5 or 6.
There is so much to discuss. And just a heads up for everybody watching and listening, we're going to read some details of the case, and then we're going to discuss and share our opinions on it. So it's not just all reading. So just buckle up, bitch besties. So this happened on December 24, Christmas Eve of 2002 in Modesto, California. Laci, 27 years old, 8 months pregnant, and her husband were eating breakfast and watching an episode of Martha Stewart. He says Laci was cleaning up and mopping the kitchen floor before wanting to take the dog for a walk. He decided it was too cold to play golf at the club, so he decided to go fishing instead. He was seen by a neighbor loading umbrellas into his truck. They greeted each other, so, you know, he was seen. He then went to his warehouse, which is 3 miles away from the house, checks his emails, sends an email, loads the boat, drives to Berkeley to the marina, and that assumingly took about an hour and a half. And there's proof for all of this. There's proof that he was on his computer between approximately 10:30 and 10:56 this morning. At 10:18, one of the neighbors of the Petersons' house put the Petersons' dog in the backyard because the dog was roaming by itself, it's a she, by herself in the streets with a leash on, which apparently is not completely unusual. The dog would sometimes break out of the backyard and the neighbors would just put her back in the backyard. So at 10:18, this exactly happened. And Mackenzie, the dog, still had the collar and the leash on. Scott has a receipt for 12:54 from a parking lot at the marina in Berkeley. And he says he was out at the water from 1 to 2 p.m. approximately. At 2:15 p.m., so once he came off the water, he called Laci at home on her mobile phone as he was leaving the marina and left her a message because she wasn't picking up. Approximately by 4:30 p.m., he arrives back at the warehouse where he parked his boat. When he came home, she wasn't there and the dog was in the backyard with her leash still on. So he put his clothes in the washer, showered, ate pizza, and drank some milk. And at 5:17, he called Sharon Rocha, who is Laci's mom, to see if Laci was there. Christmas Eve. So he told Laci's mom that the car and the dog were there, but Laci wasn't. So then eventually at 5:47, about half an hour, 20 minutes later, Laci's stepfather called 911. At 6 p.m., the police arrives, meets with Scott and Sharon at the park before going to Scott's and Laci's house. The detective immediately went through the house and drawers and rooms and didn't see any evidence for a fight or blood splatter or anything. And Scott voluntarily sat down with the police and was very cooperative. In the interview, the officer asked if there was any marital issues, and Scott says no. Detective described that Scott was acting a little odd and not asking the typical questions of what they are doing and focusing on, nothing like that. So they asked him, I think it was the next day, Christmas Day, to take a polygraph. But his father had advised Scott to not take the polygraph because he was concerned they might spin whatever the outcome is. So he declines to take this polygraph test, which would have possibly also been a chance for him to clear himself, but he declined to do that. By 12:26, so the very next day, 2 days since Laci's missing, the community had already established a volunteer center and everybody was looking for Laci and taking phone tips. They were rooming the area and everything. And there were multiple people, they say, that they saw Laci walking the dog that day. By 12:26, the same night at 5 p.m., the police shows up with a search warrant. And apparently he was previously asked to sign up on a paper to search the home, but Scott didn't hear back in time from his lawyer. And this was all from the Hulu documentary. So this is very much the point of view of Scott and his defense lawyer. So they're telling us the story in this way that, Scott just didn't want to sign off on the search warrant because he didn't know exactly what his signature would mean under this legal document. And because the lawyer didn't get back to him soon enough, fast enough, the police then showed up with the official search warrant and searched the house, which made him look bad because, it's like he doesn't volunteer to show his house. They have to get the search warrant from a judge. And that was a red flag for the police because he didn't give permission on his own. They needed a search warrant. Within days, this story blew up so much. It was a huge media storm. And the media presence pretty much changed everything in this case. And Laci's mom says early on in a press conference that they love Scott and they feel he has nothing to do with that. It was very early on in the case. And then on December 30th, 2002, my birthday, police first released the information about the burglary directly across the street of Laci and Scott's home on Christmas Eve. So apparently right across the street, literally across the street from their house, was a burglary. The date is questionable, and we get to that detail, but it may have been on Christmas Eve. And they say there's a witness who saw the suspicious people in a van at around 11:40 a.m. on Christmas Eve, the day Laci went missing. And even her brother says in an interview, what's the odds of two crimes in the same neighborhood on the same day? So maybe that's the theory from the Hulu documentary. Maybe Laci saw something across the street suspiciously and went across the street to see what's going on and somehow, that turned into her being kidnapped or whatever. But somehow the police was able to capture the burglars fairly quickly. And that was a little odd in this whole documentary. So they capture the people, and then all of a sudden the date of the burglary changes. And they were asked, but there was this comment where they said, we did burgle this house, but we have nothing to do with the disappearance of the pregnant woman. And the detective says, well, I'm not here to talk to you about that. I'm here to talk about the burglary. And all of that, all of a sudden, they said, well, we burgled the house on December 27, which isn't true because there was a huge media frenzy, all the media events in the street on that day. So somehow they ended up saying that burglary took place on December 26th. That was a little odd. What is your thoughts on that, Paige?
Yeah. I mean, how do they not remember what day? I mean, I don't know. I've never done that. So I don't know if criminals keep track of, when they commit crimes. But my thing is, why did the police kind of coach them into picking a date that it happened? That, and also at that point, the case was well known. There was media at Scott and Lacey's house. The police were there. How do they commit this crime when there's literally so many witnesses? So that date kind of doesn't make sense to me. I feel like it goes back to the 24th.
Yeah. And even if that happened on the 26th, there was at least one reporter already there in the early morning hours or all day. So in the Hulu documentaries, they say because this one reporter and camera team was there, there's no way they would have bulldozed this house with
Right.
camera team right there.
Someone would have seen them.
Yeah,
I mean, I know criminals aren't the smartest, but there are very smart criminals. Why would you risk your chances of being caught when there's, literally a media team right there?
yeah. And then in the Netflix documentary, just to make this comparison, that's pretty much like the Netflix documentary tells the story from point of view of the detectives. There's this one main detective pretty much giving a lot of interviews for this documentary and telling the whole story. And he says to that, well, those are criminals. They don't have watches. They don't know what date it is. So it's just natural that they are confused about what date it is. And then also the van that was seen by the witness, um, and apparently there were multiple witnesses. We can talk about that too. But he said, well, the color of the van changed in the witness statement. First it was white, and then it was like tan, and then it was a beige. So that wasn't credible for them. Well, I'm thinking, don't witness statements, you always have to take them with a grain of salt because you only remember so much, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, eyewitness statements, they're not always credible in that sense, but I mean, white, beige, cream, like it's all very similar color. Why?
Yeah.
Yes, the color of the van matters, but overall, like if you're seeing, suspicious behavior and you see a van, like, okay, generally it's a light colored van. Like, who cares about the color at that point? As long as they're like, generally the same color scheme. I
Yeah.
don't know.
And there was another witness who says that later on, not in that neighborhood, somewhere else, the van was seen with a pregnant woman. She looks like she was taking a pee, and two men hushed her back into the van. So that could also be an indicator of they took Lacey, and because she was so highly pregnant, she just had to pee somewhere, and they pulled over and let her out. But there wasn't much said about that. So I'm not sure how credible that witness is. I don't really know. Like, I
I
just
was going to
wanted
say,
to,
I don't even remember reading about that. So who knows?
yeah. So, and then from the Netflix point of view, in the initial police interrogation, he seemed totally chill. That's what the detective says, right? He was leaned back, had his hands in his pockets, relaxed, not worried about his wife at all. He said to one of the neighbors asking for Lacey that he was golfing instead that he was fishing. So the detective was like, how can you forget what you were doing that day? I don't know.
I don't know if I caught up on that. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. my question is, he wanted to go golfing that day. That's what he said. But because it was so cold, he decided to go fishing instead. So maybe, devil's advocate over here in the whole frenzy of being, oh my God, my wife is gone. Where is she? And what happened to her that came out wrong? And he said, I went golfing and there's not too much weight to it. Or that's an indicator of he's lying. He didn't go fishing at all. We don't know.
Right. Could go
Right.
either way.
hmm And the other suspicious things that they bring up in the Netflix documentary is that none of the friends or Laci's family knew that he even had a boat. And he said it was a surprise. And then they interview Laci's mom, and she goes like, "Surprise for whom? It's your boat, not ours." Like, what do we
Right. Yeah,
care
I
if you
thought that
want
was
to
so
close it?
odd.
Yeah. And it turns out he bought the boat on December 9th, right before the disappearance, pretty much. So it was a brand new boat. And the date, December 9th, we'll circle back to that. That also has significance later. And the police says, the detective says he searched the internet for tides that day, the flow of the water that day, but he didn't search for anything fishing related other than the tides, which for them was suspicious. And he had bought new fishing bait, like blinkers and stuff, which he said he used, but they were all in the original packaging still. The package wasn't even opened. So that's also suspicious.
Hmm.
But they didn't say if he has other blinkers as well. They were just pointing out that those were in the packaging. There might be others that he has used. We don't know. Um, and then there was this whole anchor thing. So apparently in his warehouse, he made his own homemade anchors. I think they were 8-pound anchors made out of cement. And he says he only made one. But the police say, and they show a picture where I couldn't see anything, but they say the signs on the floor with the splatter of the cement mix that there must have been at least 8 anchors or something. And they say it looks like they were standing right there and the sprinkle of the cement mix is around. I couldn't see it. Could you see it? Do you know what picture I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about. I don't know what to look for. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not an expert, so, like, I have no idea. Like,
Yeah.
sure, they could be telling me that, and I could believe them because I don't know. So, we
Yeah.
don't know. Like, we weren't there, we don't have the proof, you know what I mean? So
Yeah. And then what I found interesting, what the detective pointed out in the Netflix documentary, so he says he made this one anchor and only the one anchor, and they found this one anchor in his boat, but there was no rope with the anchor. Like, what do you do with an anchor if you can rope it to the boat?
yeah, I don't know. We need to take some boating lessons.
Yeah. And I think the only piece of evidence they really have, if I may say so, sorry being judgy bitch over here, was a pair of pliers, which was found in the boat and that had a pair of laces wrapped around it. And yeah, they also said, I think I'd come to that a little later. They also said that Laci was never at the warehouse. So how does this hair come on the plier? But that wasn't true because in the Hulu documentary, they say they have a witness in trial who says, no, Laci was actually using the neighbor's bathroom while she was in the warehouse. And I come to that a little later. Sorry, I have to circle back to that. So, but back to the family dynamics. Laci's mom said that Scott never wanted to have kids before. So now, and Laci was pregnant 8 months. Of course, he's allowed to change his mind, right? I think they've been together for 4 years at this time. And then they say in the Netflix documentary, Laci's diary stated that he didn't show much excitement when he felt the baby move for the first time in the belly. And the Netflix documentary also states when they were searching with the volunteer group in the neighborhood, Scott kept making jokes and he was joking around while everybody's looking for his pregnant wife, which they also found very suspicious. And the police says there were so many eyewitnesses, they claim, who saw Laci walking the dog after Scott had already left for the fishing trip. So they, on the Hulu documentary, they say because there were so many witnesses seeing Laci walking the dog, that shows that she was alive after Scott had left for his fishing trip. So he couldn't be the one who killed her. And actually the police believes that he probably already killed her on the 23rd of December and took the night to wrap her up in the tarp or whatever and load her on his truck to bring her to the warehouse the next day to load her on his boat. And, that's why he has a receipt for the fishing. But when witnesses see her walking the dog on the morning of the 24th, and even from the timeline after Scott had left to go fishing, they say, well, then he couldn't have done it, right? But in the Netflix documentary, the detectives say, well, all those witnesses weren't really credible because apparently what they said, what she was wearing, her clothes, didn't really match the description or was like off sometimes. And in the Netflix documentary, the detective made this weird comment where he was like, and none of the witnesses knew Laci, so they couldn't say for sure this was Lucy. But I wonder, does a witness have to know the victim to say I saw her? I mean, how many pregnant women walking a golden retriever in that specific neighborhood wearing a light shirt and a dark leggings or yoga pants or whatever are there?
Yeah, I don't see how that is relevant.
Yeah, that was weird to me a little bit.
Yeah, I
I
don't.
don't know. But they kept pounding him because he wasn't cooperative with the polygraph. He seemed very suspicious. And then they said in the Netflix documentary on the 55th day of Laci being missing, so a couple months down, he had already completely changed the house. There was no respect to her belongings. The nursery was a storage room pretty much. And he just wanted to get rid of that house ASAP. He was getting ready to sell it. And he had already sold her car, which they say is super suspicious. What do you think?
Yes, it does bring up some red flags. You know, I would hope that he would have hope, that they would be found. But at the same time, it's kind of like, all right, like, time is passing. It's not, looking too good. It might just be so hard to see everything and, be around in that environment. People grieve differently. I will say that, going back to him and his behavior for the search, like him joking around, like I have a very sick way of like dealing with grief and,
Yeah.
awkward situations. So like I always try and joke around. I'm always laughing, being sarcastic, but that's my coping mechanism. You know what I mean? Like everyone's different. So, yes, it is very strange, especially for him selling her car.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, like it might have been, I don't know, it's like going devil's advocate. Like, yes, it's a red flag, but could be too hard for him. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
odd for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. But as you say, everybody is different. I agree with you 100%. And what I
Hmm.
didn't know until I watched the Netflix documentary, and maybe I just missed it in the Hulu one, but they also say that her purse was in the house. And I read online in one of the Reddits that also her shoes were in the house, which I'm not sure if it's true. Because I feel like if her shoes were in the house, that is such a big evidence. They would have said that in the other documentary. So I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah.
I feel that if her shoes were in the house, then 100% he killed her. I think that's like the biggest evidence, right? Because the theory that she walked across the street to see what's going on with the burglary, she would have put her shoes on.
Yeah. Or, I mean, what if she has numerous pairs of shoes? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then in the Netflix documentary, the detective also stated that apparently Scott made a wrong statement about her clothes. He said she was wearing whatever, and then when she was actually found months later, she was in the clothes from December 23rd that her sister had seen her in. So the body was found in the clothes that she was wearing on December 23rd, which of course, again, doesn't speak for him. It's highly suspicious. Yeah. So this all isn't enough to make the case more interesting. All of a sudden, on January 24, 2003, exactly 1 month after Laci disappeared, Amber Frey appeared. And Amber Frey gives a press conference with the police and states that she has been in a relationship with Scott Peterson for a couple of months. Mic drop. Crazy. So she
Yeah.
says 5 weeks before the disappearance, Scott met Amber and started an affair with her. She did not know that he was married. She thought he is single as a Pringle. He didn't mention that he was married at all. And on December 9th, remember, I'm going to circle back to that date. That was the day that Scott bought his boat. December 9 was the day that Scott bought his boat. And on December 9, he tells Amber that his wife has died and that this would be his first holidays without her. What do you think?
What was the words that he used? I lost my wife. Indicating more so that she passed away rather than he lost her in the sense like he lost their relationship or whatever. Um, yeah, I just not looking good there. Not looking good. Painting that picture is mm.
Yeah. And to make matters worse for himself, he had told Amber that he was traveling for the holidays and the New Year in Europe. So he calls her on December 31st, while Lacey's already missing. He calls Amber pretending to be in Paris with a lot of background noise, almost like believable that he's in Paris celebrating New Year's Eve, while he was actually at his wife's candlelight. Wait, but what do you call it?
The vigil.
Vigil. Thank you.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, like what the hell? He's like, oh yeah, there's fireworks, it's beautiful, this and that. Why are you so concerned with one, your mistress, but two, also like keeping up with the lie that you're in Europe? You're literally at your missing wife who's pregnant with your child candlelight vigil. Pay attention. What are you doing? Why are you focusing on that? It's just so bizarre.
What he doesn't know is that once Amber became aware of the missing Lacey case, which until that point she wasn't, because she wasn't watching the news, she didn't know what was going on, a friend pointed it out to her. And once she learned about it, she reached out to the police and agreed to cooperate with them. So they put a recording device on her phone that recorded all the conversation that Amber and Scott have with each other. And Amber played along and played the role of she doesn't know anything and she just thinks it's her boyfriend and doesn't know anything about the wife or him even being married. So that's how they found out from the actual recordings that he says to her on December 31st, I'm in Paris. So that's just insane. So eventually, in cooperation with the police, Amber confronted Scott that she has been warned. So Scott came clean to her and said his wife was missing and he had lied to Amber. So he admits that to Amber on the phone. As I said, on January 24, exactly 1 month since the disappearance, Amber reads a statement that the police had written for her at this press conference. And Lacey's family immediately turned on Scott. So did the entire public, of course, the whole media frenzy. So the volunteer center that opened exactly 1 day after her disappearance closed immediately. And the media painted him more and more guilty in the press. Amber's appearance changed Scott's mind, and he wanted to do interviews with maximum media coverage. So it was said in the Netflix and the Hulu documentary. That was also the same time the State of the Union address was going to happen. So they waited this out because he wanted to make sure there is no distraction from the story to get the most media coverage to find his wife. And, that was the reasoning in the Hulu documentary why then so late into this case, he finally agreed to work with the media, which he hasn't before. But that backfired on him. I think he gave multiple interviews. And in one interview, he was backhandedly caught in a lie about the affair by saying, he said, he had told the police right from the get-go on December 24, the day Laci disappeared. He says he told the police about the affair with Amber. But there's a recording showing where he was asked if there was anything going on in the marriage, and he said no. So that was a lie. And then in an interview with Diane Sawyer, he said that he had told Laci about the affair and she was okay with that. And Diane Sawyer leans forward and goes like, "You're telling me your wife was 8 months pregnant, you tell her you have an affair and she's just okay with that?" So that didn't sound believable.
No, not at all.
And then I'm not sure which interview that was in, but that's another thing the media caught immediately. He speaks about Laci in past tense, like a slip of his tongue, and he speaks in past tense.
Yeah.
So this was all the media needed to paint him even more as a murderer. The media frenzy got really, really bad at this point, and they spun this as a motive for him. And then in the Netflix documentary, they say that Emma was a single mom. So I was like, wait, they try to paint it like he wanted out of the family because she was pregnant, but then Amber also had a child. So it's maybe not the goal to get away from the kid and the family. What is it then? So that was weird. And then another thing they said in the Netflix documentary, so the police searched the Bay Area. Modesto, where this happened, is inland of San Francisco a little bit, right? So it's like in the North California area. And I think from his warehouse, which is only 3 miles from the house, from his warehouse, it's a 90 miles drive, I believe, to the bay. So just to put this in geographical context. So the police searched the Bay Area for Laci's body, I think 24 times or something. But so while the police was searching the Bay and they have a tracker on Scott's car, they see that he drove multiple times to the Bay Area, watching the police searching for his wife. He not once talked to anybody during the search. It's not like he drove there and was like, "Hey, did you find anything? What's going on? You know, what are you focusing on?" Or asking any questions. He just drove there, watched them for 1 or 2 minutes, and then drove back wherever he was going. And that's a 90 miles drive. Isn't that weird?
It is. The only thing I can think of is like he's just going to check out the scene to play devil's advocate again. Like, is he preparing to be caught? Is her body actually going to wash up? Or is he just truly like wondering, what's going on? Let me just see if they found anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. It's weird. I don't know. So apparently during those base surges, they found like a suspicious object in the water that they were trying to hone in on. And there was also a huge mega frenzy. What could that now be? And it turned out to be just an anchor or something. And once the detective called Scott to tell him it's just an anchor, Scott made a relieved sound. And that was suspicious for the detective too. And I'm devil's advocate again. I feel like this could go two ways, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. Like, really feel like, okay, it's not her body, like it's not her. They're still her.
Right.
Or, okay, it's not her body. I'm not caught.
Right.
So,
I'm off the hook, no pun intended. Crazy. So, and then on April 14 in 2003, after a storm the previous day, a Corso was found in the San Francisco Bay by a dog walker. And about 12 to 18 hours later, an infant was also found in the Bay Area. And DNA testing identified the torso and the baby as Laci and Connor, the unborn child.
yeah, that's a shame.
And because they were found in the Bay Area where Scott was said his alibi was he was fishing there, they of course said, well, what are the odds? He goes fishing there, that's where the bodies show up, case closed. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I forget if it was from a podcast or one of the documentaries, but they were saying that where his warehouse is and the whole route to get to the actual bay. They're like, there's no way that could actually happen unless like he did dispose of their bodies there. Um yeah, it's so sad. I think everyone
It's so sad.
obviously they were hoping for the best, but sadly, yeah, that was really sad, especially with the
Yeah.
baby.
So in the Hulu documentary, again, Hulu is the one that says it from the point of view of the defense attorney. They have hired a private investigator. And here's what the private investigator says in the Hulu documentary. He says he finds multiple witnesses who have seen Laci walking the dog all the way to the park, 5 witness sightings. And one witness even seeing her in the park. I think that was the nurse getting ready for her shift and taking a smoke before going in. And she even says she saw 2 men following Laci and the dog was barking at them. And one of the men says, "Shut the dog up." And he also says they found witnesses who saw Scott in the bay, and another one even recalled seeing the boat, but not his face. He just couldn't remember seeing that specific boat. But he recalled that he looked in the boat because it was such a tiny nutshell boat with like a lower rim that he could look right into it. And he says there wasn't anything in there. And because the rim is so low, there's also no way he was hiding a pregnant body in it without
Right.
sticking out and anybody seeing it.
Yeah, he definitely would have seen Laci if she was in there, in my opinion.
Yeah. And in the Hulu documentary, they show bits and pieces of the trial. There was no camera allowed in the courtroom, but a lot of eyewitnesses and media witnesses. And they say that they even tried to reenact this whole scene of a body in the boat with, the anchor weights on her and trying to push overboard. And I think they tried it 8 times, and 8 times the person who tried it almost drowned because the boat went capsized. They weren't able to lift that, I think, 150-pound body with the anchors on over the boat. So they weren't able to reenact that. So they said it's not possible that he could have pushed her from the boat in the water.
Yeah. I think I read it was 4, but I could be wrong. But yeah, the fact that they weren't
Sorry, I could
able
be.
to do it without possibly tipping over the boat and the person who's demonstrating it almost drowning himself.
Yeah,
But the crazy thing is they weren't allowed to use that evidence in court, which I'm like, why? That would be, a great defense claim, like that's pretty much all I mean, obviously he's claiming his innocence, but like that just would just help his case so much. And it's like, why would they not allow that?
yeah. And since you mentioned that with the eyewitnesses who saw her, the 5 eyewitnesses who saw her walking the dog, in the Hulu documentary, they also say they didn't bring those as witnesses into court because they had thought they already established that she was alive on the 24th. So Scott couldn't have murdered her. So they didn't want to risk bringing in eyewitnesses and potentially being incredible and not standing, what's it called?
I know. I just,
The cross-examination,
yeah,
not standing the cross-examination and being so incredible that then all of a sudden it's doubtful again that she was even seen in real life on the 24th. So that's why they didn't bring any witnesses in trial.
yeah. And I read that after the case is said and done, that jurors were wanting to hear that because it's like, they wanted to hear that evidence because that could have persuaded their opinions. But the defense chose
Yeah,
not to do that.
yeah. I'll get to the trial again a little later. My 10 pages. There's a page about the trial on the page of crime here. Little paragraph about the police involvement because you and I we like to question the police a little bit, although we have to say that we are police
Yeah.
supporters who believe in the police, but sometimes there is black sheeps in every herd. And
Right.
I just want to point out what the Hulu documentaries brought up in questions in regards of the police involvement. So they say Kristen Smart disappeared 7 years ago during Scott's college years. And now they were investigating whether Scott has anything to do with her disappearance 7 years prior. And of course, the media picked that up immediately and, kind of like almost painted him like a serial killer. So the media found him so guilty that just, looked like a Ted Bundy kind of case. But then later they debunked that. Scott had absolutely nothing to do with that case, but the damage was already done pretty much, right? By that point, everybody believed he's Ted Bundy number 2. And then it was also said that investigators kept feeding bits and pieces during the investigation to the press, and no matter whether it was true or wrong, like this Kristen Smart's disappearing, it was absolutely false, but they kept feeding the media, and they, of course, ran with that. So they
Yep.
painted this picture, and it almost seems like police almost did this intentionally, feeding those wrong bits and pieces, because they were so focused on Scott that he is guilty and he was the one who did it. Did they even look anywhere else?
Right. I think, especially back then, the media, they ran with everything as fact as opposed to fact checking and then presenting the case or running the stories. It's kind of like they backpedaled, but didn't really backpedal because they're like, all right, like,
Yeah.
we said this was fact, so it's fact. And then they're not even going to go back and be like, by the way, this is wrong or whatever. They're just going to keep pushing out all these facts. But yeah, like you said, the damage was done at that point. Everyone had their opinion.
Yeah. And then now comes the part with Laci in the warehouse that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to circle back to. So here it is. It also came out in the trial that Laci was at the warehouse the day prior to her disappearance. A witness had seen her, and it turned out that the detective retracted this part from his police report, because in the Hulu documentary it was said because it didn't fit the narrative that he wanted to tell, which means Scott is guilty. So that's why he retracted this part out of the police report. However, in the Netflix documentary, the same detective, he almost like laughs about it a little bit, makes light of it a little bit. And he says, he actually, it was also addressed in court apparently. And he says he stands the situation very well because he said he retracted this part out of the police report because it was in another police report already. So he just didn't want to be repetitive. And that's why he took it out. And he believes it was very credible in court.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Do you think the police came into this investigation with blinders on?
Um, I think because statistically, and I forget the number, so don't quote me, but statistically, the spouse is the number one suspect. So I feel as though, him being the spouse, her being pregnant, it just being a very, like, the case being, taking off with the media. I think they kind of did just stick with him. I don't know if they necessarily investigated any other sources. So I kind of do
Yeah.
feel as though they did.
Yeah. I have the same impression, at least coming from those documentaries I watched. There was no mentioning of them investigating anything else but him
Right.
very early on.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the arrest. So at that time of the arrest, he was down in San Diego where his family lives. And because the media frenzy in Modesto, where he lives with Laci, was so bad that he went down to San Diego to kind of escape that. And they had recording devices on his phone, which he didn't know, of course. So it was said that he was planning to play golf with his family on this day, but he was followed by a car. And in the phone recording, when he called his brother to tell him, he thinks media is chasing him, and that's why he's driving like a maniac. And he says to his brother-in-law, he says that he's being followed by media and he just shouldn't go golfing because if they snap a picture of him on the golf course, that doesn't look good. But it actually turned out that it was law enforcement who chased him, and they pulled him over and arrested him right then and there. And in the car, I think it's my understanding, in the police car, they told Scott that the bodies were found And the detective in the Netflix documentary says there was barely any reaction from Scott that the bodies were found. But the media reported that in Scott's car was a lot of camping gear and equipment, a lot of money in cash. I can't remember whether it was 10,000 or 15,000,
Almost
but something in that range.
15,000.
Yeah. And they said he had dyed his hair blonde. He had his brother's ID in the car with the blonde hair. He looks like his brother. And, San Diego being so close to the border, all this cash, all this camping equipment, media painted it as if he was trying to make a run for it with his family's help. Well, in the Hulu documentary, from the other side, they even show a picture where Scott is talking to a police detective with the blonde hair. So they say, well, what kind of disguise is it if Scott talks to the police? They know that he now has blonde hair.
Right. Yeah. I feel like, you know, hearing of his arrest, how he looks, what he has on him, everything, hearing that just by itself is like, shit, like that sounds very suspicious. Like he's definitely on the run. But like you said, like there's interviews where like he did speak with the police with his new disguise. He said that he did that more so to go out and like get gas or like go to the market and not be like as recognizable,
Yeah.
to get around for his every day to day life. Everything by itself is very suspicious, but everything that he had or, how he looked or whatever, everything has an excuse or a reasoning behind it.
And I agree.
Like his brother's ID he had because he was able to get a discount from the golf course. The
Yeah.
$15,000 was because his mom purchased a car from him and she paid him in cash the day before. Um, why he didn't go and cash that in right then and there, because if anyone like myself, like I would be terrified to lose it. Um, but they said like, oh, like, he might not have just gone to the bank at that point. It was also Good Friday, so the banks may not be open. Um, there was what else was there? There was something else. What I did find very odd and how I can't explain this is the Viagra. What are you doing
Yeah.
with Viagra?
Yeah.
Also, he was down in San Diego. Yes, it is very close to the border, but like you said, like his family does live there and he was staying there for a bit. So that is also something that can be explained. Looks
Yeah.
shady, but technically can be explained.
The only questionable thing was that money for me. As you said, the mom purchased the car and she says she gave him the money in cash. And in the interview in the Hulu documentary, it was said that she wasn't interviewed, but somebody says apparently she didn't want to wire him the money because there would have been like a pending hold on the account for some days. And to avoid this, she gave him the money in cash. But then, as you say, why is he driving around with the money in cash? So apparently,
I
what's
get
the
nervous
difference if
about
you have the
carrying $100, like let alone 15,000.
yeah.
Get the hell out of here.
What's the big deal of the pending hold on the account if you don't need that money for anything
Right.
specific, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think wires typically take, I should know this because I literally used to do this in my career. They don't take that long, but then obviously it's the holiday and a weekend, so there is going to be a delay. But if he's not hurting for cash,
Yeah.
what what's the holdup? Like why not do that? That's a
Yeah.
more secure way to do it as opposed to the 15 in cash.
What do you say to the fact that he apparently didn't have a reaction to the detective telling him the bodies were found?
Um again, our famous line today. The common theme of this episode is devil's advocate. Maybe he was just in shock. Like he was literally just arrested and then you're springing this information on him. Like one thing is happening and then he's getting this information. So it's like he could be in total shock or he is the heartless person that everyone claims that he is?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I can only think it would be shock. Just from experience with my own trauma and loss, like just in disbelief and shock.
Yeah. And again, playing devil's advocate even more, I also believe if we had shown any type of reaction, they would have still spun it. And, if he was like, oh my God, then they would say, well, now he's shocked that he did it and they found the bodies. I think nothing he could have done in that situation would have been the right thing.
Right. I agree.
All right, let's talk about the trial a little bit. Um, the trial started in June 2004, so a year and a half after the disappearance. And it was actually trialed in Redwood City, which is about 15 miles from Modesto, very close to San Francisco, which is the main media hub in that area. But also moved to a different county because of the media frenzy in his home county, and they couldn't find unbiased jurors there. And they said in the Hulu documentary, about 50% of people interviewed for jury duty said that they think he's guilty. So they had a really hard time finding jurors.
I can't imagine trying to find an unbiased juror. I was 9 when this case came out, living in
Yeah,
right outside of Philadelphia, so I can't imagine finding a juror who's not biased in California and that area that he's from, because it was so popular and so widespread that, like, everyone had an opinion on this. Everyone knew about this case. So I just think I don't know, I don't think he had a fair chance to begin with.
yeah. And it's even said in the Hulu documentary, they said jurors interviewed in this documentary said once they found out it's this case, they actually went home and Googled.
Yeah,
And then others faked responses just to get onto the jury because they wanted to convict him so badly as a murderer. And then they bragged about it online.
yeah. The jury misconduct was real, for sure.
Yeah. And it was such a high media case. The trial itself wasn't televised, but there were so many media people present outside the courthouse. Was a huge crowd of people, media and spectators and everything. They said it was such a big spectacle. They actually, in the Hulu documentary, compared it to Michael Jackson or OJ cases. That's how big it was. And at that
That's ins
time, Scott Peterson was the most hated man in America.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. And it was a death penalty case. And in the Hulu documentary, it's pointed out that there was zero forensic evidence, which I'm not sure I believe because there was the hair on the flyers. That for me is evidence.
Yeah, but is it enough evidence to get a guilty verdict with the death penalty sentence?
Right. Exactly. So in the Hulu documentary, the trial was covered more in detail. So most of my notes are from that. And it says the theory was that Scott killed Laci the night before on December 23rd and attached the 8-point weight, as we said earlier, around her neck and dumped her in the bay. And actually that he had made more weights attached to them as they prove on that picture where I couldn't see anything. But there is no evidence really supporting this theory. Nothing in the boat. She was seen on the next day and so on. And in trial, a computer forensic actually testified that the morning of December 24, someone searched on the Petersons household computer umbrellas with sunflower patterns, which were Laci's favorite flowers. And Scott Peterson didn't even know about that. So they said if this would be evidence that Laci was alive on the morning of Christmas Eve, wouldn't Scott have pointed out, no, she Googled something on the computer. You should check for it, because he didn't know, he never pointed that out. So the defense said, if he didn't know, but that proves that she was alive, so he couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
So then that made the prosecutors pivot their theory and said, okay, well, then he killed her afterward, which is also odd. I don't know. And then there was all this drama surrounding the jurors. So one juror was removed from the jury for allegedly talking about the case. But in reality, I think they interviewed him in the Hulu documentary, and he said he thought that Scott was not guilty. And another juror didn't like that, so he read him out, and that's how he was removed.
Yeah.
And this then again was very intimidating to the other jurors, especially the ones that were on Scott's side until that point, because Scott was so ripped apart in the media. So the media had a huge influence on the jurors as well. And again, as I said earlier, the defense provided evidence that he couldn't have thrown the body in with the weights on from the boat. And even the body movement with the tidal action was not believed in trial. So there was also someone specialist who said that it couldn't be this way or whatever. But they say that it's very suspicious. The media reports for months and months and months, or even like over a year and a half probably, that Scott was fishing in the bay, and then the bodies wash up in the exact bay area. So the defense said, of course, if somebody else had killed her, they would drop her off there where they report for a year and a half. That's where he went fishing, to pin it on him and to distract from the actual murderer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually.
And then they brought an expert on to talk about the baby. And that was a little confusing in the Hulu documentary to me. Apparently, there's a formula that they can measure whatever bones of the baby to determine the age of the baby. And the expert they had on trial determined with this formula that the baby must have lived until January something, so way past Laci's disappearance date. So it was said, well, if the baby lived past, then, Scott wasn't the murderer. But apparently he didn't stand trial well. He wasn't credible because he used the wrong formula. I think that's my understanding. Do you have any more info?
Don't. I know that there's, formulas in that sense, but everything is not concrete. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that would be credible, only because they don't know when she went missing. They don't know, when she actually died. They don't know how long he was in the womb for, or, when he was delivered. Yeah, I don't know. That Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about that one.
And then remember I said the neighbor who found the dog put the dog in the backyard with the collar and the leash on at 10:18. So that was also a big highlight in the court trial. And it turned out that this neighbor was able to come up with a receipt of that day, and retracing her steps, they were able to determine that it must have been 10:18 when she put the dog in the backyard. But Laci was seen by other witnesses at 10:45 walking the dog. But then again, the defense didn't bring those witnesses to court because they were afraid they weren't credible enough. And in their mind, they had already established that Laci was alive on 12/24. And, the prosecutor's theory was that he killed her the night before. So that's why they didn't really jump in on this in trial. I believe that's what I understand. Um, and then the closing arguments were, do you have any other details to the trial before we go to the closing?
Um, there was faulty evidence that could have led to his conviction. They used dog smelling or cadaver smelling dogs, but it was later determined that they failed their certifications. So
Yeah.
they're not credible, in my opinion. They had, I think it was two other times they used them and they were not able to find any traces. But then on the third time, they were able to find a trace. But the evidence that they used potentially had Scott's DNA as well as Laci's. So there may not have been a true hit for Laci, but it could have been Scott's DNA that they had a hit on. So
Interesting.
that was used. That was used, but the boat evidence where the boat almost capsized was not used. What
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. And then the judge allowed the jurors to go into the boat while it was on land, and they got to, see the boat, get inside it, all that. What he didn't allow was them to go out on the boat in the water, because he said it was too dangerous, which I'm like, that was you know, a perfect example for the defense to say, "Hey, okay, so it's too dangerous." So, they could have used that, but they didn't. So that I think hurt them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings me to a question since you just mentioned the judge didn't allow this and that. They had such a hard time finding unbiased people as jurors. It was such a huge media frenzy. Who tells us that the judge wasn't biased? I mean, obviously, it's his job to not be biased, but with such a high profile case, he can. I think it was a guy, right? I'm just referring to him as he.
I think, yeah, I think so.
He cannot avoid hearing all this on the media. So, how is it humanly possible to not have an opinion, right? Like, how do you ensure that he isn't biased?
Right. I mean, if the jurors were able to Google the case, like, who's to say that the judge wasn't able to do that? Yeah, I just think, like I said, I think from the very beginning that he didn't have a fair trial.
Yeah. I think so too. And then the closing arguments happened on November 2nd of 2004. So the trial lasted pretty much 5 months. And witnesses say the defense attorney's closing argument was too flat and he had a bad day. And it's a very bad day to have a bad day. It was said in the Hulu documentary. And prosecution stated they didn't know when it happened, how it happened, or where it happened, but they knew for a fact it was Scott Pierce.
How? How? Like, that was literally their only argument, was that he killed her to start a brand new life with his girlfriend. But they had no physical evidence.
There was no
That is
physicality.
so
And how
bizarre.
can you say in the closing argument, you don't know when, where, how, or even the motive, why, but we know it
Right.
was him
Yeah, that's and for a fact.
for a fact. Yeah, that's so weird. And then
Yeah.
the jury drama continued. So during deliberation, apparently one juror was removed for Googling something. So they removed him and a new juror was brought in and the deliberation needed to start all over again to catch up that new juror. But the others didn't really want to discuss the same things over and over again. So they started fighting and yelling at each other until the foreman of the jurors went to the judge because he was threatened by another juror and was let go. So they let go of the foreman of the jury and a new foreman was brought in. And I think that new foreman, correct me if I'm saying that wrong, was Strawberry Shortcake. Is that correct?
I don't know. And I didn't
Doesn't
hear
matter.
that.
Doesn't matter. So Strawberry Shortcake came in as a juror. She's a woman, and I think the media called her Strawberry Shortcake because of her red hair, whatever, and her whole appearance with tattoos,
Oh,
whatever.
yes. I know what you're talking about. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you threw me off. I was like,
So that
"What?"
so that new foreman was brought in on November 11 in the afternoon. And the jury was instructed by the judge to restart deliberation. And then the very next morning, I have to repeat that. The, the new foreman was brought in the afternoon. The judge says you have to restart deliberation. There's only so many hours in the day, right? That the jury works because they don't work nights. But then the very next morning, the jury came back with a 12-0 verdict of guilty.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I am so shocked. Clearly there was some coercing or I should say persuasion onto getting that guilty verdict, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Again.
Something seems odd about this. I mean,
Mhm.
there's no way that they discussed the entire trial, all the evidence they heard in the trial within a couple of hours, or how many hours that afternoon had left, and all come on the same page as, a anonymously guilty verdict. I don't know.
Right, unless she was going in there biased, which
Yeah.
they came out and did say that she was biased.
Yeah. And in the Hulu documentary, they kind of said, or I think they said it, they removed everybody from the jury who was on Scott's side. And only those who were against him were left, pretty much. And then they had interviews in that documentary, some of the jurors in both documentaries, actually in Hulu and in the Netflix documentary, they're using the same jurors that they interview. And they state that they don't have any regrets. And one said he believes Scott is guilty until someone proves him otherwise.
I just want to know how.
So, isn't it your job as a jury to presume innocence until proven guilty? So it's
Right.
opposite. You cannot presume guiltiness until proven innocent.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
I don't know. And then the juror said in the interview that Sharon Rocha's testimony, Laci's mom testimony, sealed the deal for them because it was so heart-wrenching and emotional. And that's why they decided to recommend the death penalty.
Yeah, that I did listen to it and it was very sad. So I do.
But is that technically right? Because there was a sad testimony. That's why they suggest the death penalty. Shouldn't that be made out on other factors than emotions? I don't know. That sounds
Oh,
weird to
yeah,
me
for
too.
sure. For sure. And that's what I was going to say. Yes, it was heartbreaking to hear. But again, I don't know if that calls for the death penalty.
Yeah. And then I think in the Netflix documentary, when they interview the same jurors again, they say they believe he was guilty because he had ordered porn channels 2 weeks after her disappearance, and they were shown kind of making fun of it and calling him names. And I think even Strawberry Shortcake was interviewed right after the trial, and she had made comments about him very emotionally charged instead of just rationally questioning. And she also kept referring to Connor, the baby, as little man. And then later turns out that I think the private investigator or something found out that she had filed for protection orders when she was 4 months pregnant. So she was very emotionally involved because she could relate to it from her personal experience.
Yeah.
Okay. My question also is Scott Peterson's suspicious behavior and seemingly being emotionally detached and lying about the affair enough to convict him when there's no physical evidence?
I mean, sadly, yes, in this case. And I think there are others. But in my own opinion, I don't think that's enough. Like, that is just, it's mind blowing that there's no evidence, DNA evidence, and he was sentenced to death because of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. At the time of the trial, because of all the media frenzy, Scott Peterson was the most hated man in America. We heard about police involvement and juror behavior, removal of those thinking he was not guilty. Plus, there was this big cheering crowd outside of the courthouse that wanted him guilty. Does that influence, in your opinion, the jury at all? Is
Yeah.
that immediately, is that intimidating to them to even acquit him?
Yeah. I mean, I would think so. Um, I think they felt the peer pressure from one another and also the media because everyone had such a strong opinion. And this was such a high profile case that I think they definitely felt the peer pressure to convict.
Believe so too. And it's just human. I mean, you're just a human. Of course you feel intimidated. The entire world hates him. There's a huge crowd outside that's loudly cheering. I mean, can you imagine if you are in the jury and you decide to acquit him and then you have to walk out through this crowd? They would lynch you.
Yeah. Yeah. And your name is public. Everything people can find all of the information. And, with the way the world is today, if you have an opinion and, you know, there's people that don't agree with you, sometimes you get attacked, verbally and online, but also physically. Like people are crazy nowadays. I would be terrified to be on a jury
Yeah.
and, having to do this case.
Do you think he had a fair trial?
No, I don't. I think, like I said before, that his case was so popular and all over every news outlet that even, here in Pennsylvania, like everyone had their own opinion. So the fact that he had to have a trial in his own area where he's well known, like I think everyone was pretty biased.
I think so too. And that doesn't mean, just making it very clear here for the bitch besties, that doesn't mean that you and I think he's innocent. We're just stating our opinions on the trial and what sounds
Right.
suspicious. We don't know whether he did it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I was 9 when this happened, and I remember when this came out, the media painted a picture that he killed his pregnant wife and he was guilty. I had pretty much everyone in my family were like, oh, yeah, he's guilty. It wasn't until I started doing my own research, like as an adult, when more podcasts and documentaries came out, that I learned more information and evidence that wasn't presented, and how the media does twist certain things and how they, you know, state facts, even though they're not really facts. So, as much as I think he's a shitty person, I don't necessarily know if he killed his wife, or at least should have been found guilty and sentenced to death, which obviously was later turned into life in prison. There just wasn't enough. Like, if I was on the jury, I don't know if I could confidently say, yes, he's guilty. Yes, he deserves to be put to death because of reasonable doubt.
Yeah. Do you believe there would have been a different outcome if it wasn't for the huge media spectacle? If this was an unknown case, do you think the jury would have voted differently?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I did watch the one documentary where it was his family wanting to get his story out there, his side of the case, and his sister actually went to law school to try and learn the information and to try and get a new case going. I think if people had more of a background knowledge of the criminal justice system, if they had the evidence from start to finish and the media didn't run everything as fact, I think he may have had a better chance. And if the defense, presented certain evidence that could have benefited his trial, like the boat evidence, the eyewitness testimony, there were certain things that definitely could have helped them that they didn't use. And who knows, maybe that could have been, helped his case.
Talking about the verdict real quick, Scott Peterson was eventually sentenced to death. And we know that way later it was commuted to life without the possibility of parole. But because this is a super duper long episode, Paige and I, we're going to stop here. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. And we're going to record a second episode where we dive much deeper into reasonable doubt. Thank you, bitch besties, for listening. Paige, I see you in a second.
Yeah.
Thanks, bitch besties, for listening. Make sure to follow us at the Judgy Bitch Pod. And hey, spread the word. Tell your friends, your ex, your dog walker. We'd love the support. Want to be part of the show? DM us your feedback, hot takes, or unapologetic opinions. We just might read them on air. And don't forget to follow, rate, and review the pod. See you next week. Cheers, bitches.